The moment I opened my front door and saw Carol from the HOA strutting up my driveway with her little clipboard and that smug look on her face, I knew my Saturday was about to go straight to hell. "I'm here about the unauthorized flagpole in your front yard, Mr. Asher," she said, squinting like the morning sun personally offended her. I looked over at the 10-foot flagpole we installed last weekend. It had taken me and my wife, Reagan, a few hours to set up. We flew the American flag and right below it, the flag of Reagan's unit. She's a lieutenant colonel in the Army and just got back from deployment. The flagpole was her welcome home gift. "It's not unauthorized," I said, arms crossed. "We submitted the paperwork 2 weeks ago. It's within regulation height and the pole's in the approved zone." Carol flipped a page on her clipboard like she was about to announce a death sentence. "The board denied the request. You were notified." "No, we weren't." "Well, I'm notifying you now. That's a violation and you're being fined $500. I didn't move. "We're not paying a fine for honoring my wife's service." Carol's nostrils flared. "Refusing to comply is a direct violation of HOA code section." "Carol," I interrupted, "this pole isn't coming down. And until I see something signed by the board with a timestamp, there's no violation." She stared at me like I'd just kicked her poodle. "You think you're above the rules?" "No," I said. "I just know them better than you." Carol's lips curled. "Fine. Let's get someone who does respect the law." She pulled out her phone and dialed 911 right there, telling the dispatcher there was a hostile man refusing HOA directives and causing a disturbance. Her voice was dramatic enough to win an award. 10 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up. Carol immediately waved it down and marched over like she was about to receive a medal. "Officer," she called out, "this man is refusing lawful orders from the HOA. He's aggressive and non-compliant. I fear for my safety." The officer stepped out of the car, sunglasses on, one hand resting near his belt, but the second he saw Reagan, who had stepped outside when she saw the patrol car, his posture changed. He straightened. Then he saluted. "Lieutenant Colonel Presley," he said. "Ma'am." Reagan returned the salute like she'd done it 1,000 times before. "At ease, officer." Carol's jaw nearly hit the sidewalk. The officer turned to me. "Sir, is there a problem here?" "Only that I refuse to pay a fake fine for a legal flagpole." He nodded. "I see no issue with the pole." Then he turned back to Carol. "Ma'am, calling 911 for a non-criminal HOA dispute is misuse of emergency services. I suggest you follow proper civil channels." Carol's face turned beet red. But he's violating HOA rules." Reagan stepped forward, calm and sharp as ever. "I read the bylaws cover to cover. The board can't retroactively deny a request after ignoring it for 7 business days. That's in Section 8. The officer tipped his hat. "Sounds like you've got it handled, ma'am." Carol sputtered, but the officer was already walking back to his cruiser. "Me?" I was trying not to laugh. Reagan leaned over and whispered, "Did she really call the cops on a flagpole?" "Yep," I said, and got saluted in the process. Carol stormed off, muttering about escalation and further action. Whatever she had planned, I had a feeling it would blow up in her face. By Monday morning, the emails started. First, it was a reminder from the HOA board that our property was under review for escalating noncompliance. Then came a formal letter, unsigned, claiming our disregard for community standards posed a security threat to the neighborhood and would result in additional administrative penalties if not resolved immediately. Reagan read it over coffee and blinked slowly. "They're trying to frame a flagpole as a security threat." I leaned over her shoulder, scanning the legalese. "They're laying groundwork to justify something bigger, probably trying to push for a lien." She set the letter down, her expression unreadable. "I've dealt with insurgents more organized than this." I didn't laugh. She wasn't joking. We both knew what this was: retaliation. Carol hadn't gotten her way, and now the board was going to squeeze us however they could, quietly behind closed doors. But they'd underestimated just how good Reagan was at exposing operations that liked to stay hidden. By Tuesday, Reagan had requested the HOA's meeting minutes from the last 90 days under Colorado's Common Interest Ownership Act. They were legally required to provide them within 10 business days. Instead, we got a curt reply from the HOA secretary, Hal Beringer, saying the documents were confidential internal records not available to residents without board clearance. Reagan's eyes narrowed. "That's illegal," I nodded. "They're hiding something." So we called in some backup. Our next-door neighbor, Daniel, was a retired paralegal who once worked for a firm that specialized in property law. He'd lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years and had seen 4 different HOA boards come and go, none of them as bad as this one, he said. Daniel came over with a yellow legal pad and a cup of black tea. "They're bluffing," he said flatly after reading Hal's email. "Meeting minutes are public for all HOA members, period. If they refuse to provide them, you can file a complaint with the Department of Regulatory Agencies." Reagan tapped her fingers against the table. "I want to know what they discussed the day after we submitted the flagpole request." "That timing's too close." Daniel made a note. "I'll help you draft a formal notice. If they ignore it, we escalate." Meanwhile, I started quietly talking to more neighbors. Word had already spread about Carol calling the cops. Some people thought it was funny, others were worried. "She tried to fine me for having my garage door open too long," said Mr. Vargas 2 houses down. "Then claimed it was inviting crime. I've lived here for 15 years. Not once has anyone broken in." "She wrote me up for planting rosemary," added Tanya from around the corner. "Said it was too fragrant." Stories poured in. Over the next few days, Reagan and I compiled a list of 23 separate residents who'd received arbitrary fines or threats in the past 6 months. Most had paid out of fear. A handful had moved to avoid fighting it. Some had been fined twice for the same offense. It was a pattern. Friday morning, Reagan filed a complaint with the state, attaching every email, letter, and neighbor statement we'd gathered. Daniel helped her cite the exact statutes the HOA had violated: failure to provide records, retaliatory enforcement, and excessive fines without due process. That same day, Carol showed up again. This time she didn't come alone. She brought a clipboard-wielding man in a cheap suit and a crooked tie. His name was Greg Lowell. He introduced himself as the HOA's legal consultant. "We're here to give you a final warning regarding the non-compliant pole structure," Greg said, glancing at it like it offended his soul. "If it's not removed by the end of the week, the board will initiate legal proceedings and attach a lien on your property." "You've already been reported to the state," Reagan said coolly. "You're not authorized to file a lien without a court order. And you're required to provide meeting minutes within 10 days of request. You failed to do both." Greg hesitated, then tried to recover. "That's not how it works. The board has discretion to protect the community from ongoing violations." Reagan stepped forward, holding out a printed copy of the Colorado statutes. "Under Section 38, Article 33.3, your discretion doesn't override state law. You've already violated 3 provisions. Want to keep going?" Greg looked visibly uncomfortable, but Carol cut in. "You're disrupting the harmony of this neighborhood, and we're not going to let one house turn this place into a circus." I stepped forward. "Harmony doesn't mean letting you run a personal dictatorship." Greg raised his hands. "All right, let's not escalate. We'll confer with the board and respond in writing." They left in a hurry. But the real storm came that Sunday. That morning, Reagan got a call from Daniel. "You're going to want to see this." He sent her a PDF, an anonymous leak of the HOA's last meeting minutes, not just the ones we asked for, all of them, dating back an entire year. They weren't just neglecting due process. They were actively falsifying violations. One entry read, "Target properties for aggressive compliance to encourage turnover. Focus on homes with high market value. Incentivize fines." Another, "Disregard pending requests if no board vote is scheduled. Default to denial if no action in 7 days." They were deliberately ignoring requests to justify violations, but the worst. A line buried in a meeting from 3 months ago. "Explore legal avenues to fast-track foreclosure on non-compliant homes to recoup costs and resell." They were trying to flip properties. That's why they were targeting long-term residents. That's why they were pushing fines so aggressively. And it was illegal. Reagan forwarded the minutes to the Department of Regulatory Agencies, the State Attorney General's office, and the county sheriff. 48 hours later, a plainclothes investigator showed up at the HOA office. We didn't need to ask what was happening. Neighbors were already texting each other. Carol had been seen being questioned in front of the clubhouse. Greg was escorted out carrying a box of files. Hal didn't answer his door all afternoon. By that evening, a notice was posted on the HOA bulletin board. Due to pending investigation, all enforcement actions are suspended until further notice. Reagan stood next to me as we read it. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. We're not done, she said quietly. They used this place like a business. Let's make sure it's run like a community again. And for the first time in a long while, people started gathering, talking, planning, organizing, not in fear but in purpose. Carol's reign was crumbling, and this time we were ready to finish the job. By Wednesday morning, the neighborhood felt different, not quieter if anything. There was more foot traffic than usual, but the energy had shifted. More people were out front trimming hedges, chatting across driveways, and keeping an eye on the HOA office, a squat brick building near the community pool that had suddenly become the center of local attention. Reagan stood at the window, arms folded, watching a man in a navy windbreaker mark the front door of the building with yellow tape. That's state code enforcement, she said. They don't show up unless there's serious mismanagement. I joined her, handing over the folder I'd just pulled from our printer. You'll want to see this. Daniel dug deeper into the HOA's tax filings. She flipped it open and scanned the top page. Her eyebrows rose. They've been reporting contractor payments for work that never happened, I said. Tree trimming, landscaping, even maintenance on the clubhouse AC unit. Tens of thousands in disbursements to a company that doesn't exist on the state registry. She turned the page. Golden Ridge Property Solutions. According to the Secretary of State's database, that LLC was dissolved last year. The registered agent address is a UPS store. Reagan exhaled through her nose. They're embezzling. That's not just civil, it's criminal. Just as she said it, our power flicked off. The lights died, the fridge clicked silent, and the ceiling fan spun to a stop. I checked the breakers, nothing tripped. Then stepped outside and saw other neighbors walking out too. House after house, dark. One of them, Greg from 3 doors down, lifted his garage manually and called over. Whole blocks out. You guys lose power too. Before I could answer, a utility truck rolled into the cul-de-sac. It wasn't from the city, it had a generic white logo that just read Community Services Division. 2 men in reflective vests stepped out, one carrying a clipboard, the other holding a lockbox. Excuse me, I said, walking toward them. What's going on? The one with the clipboard barely glanced up. Routine maintenance. Power's been temporarily disconnected per HOA directive. Should be back on by the end of the day. Reagan joined me, voice sharp. Who authorized this? Work order signed by Hal Beringer, the man replied. Said there was a safety concern involving illegal electrical modifications. Reagan took a step closer. Our property's up to code. We had a licensed electrician install everything last year. You're cutting power without inspecting the homes individually. The man hesitated. We're just following the order, ma'am. Reagan pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of the work order. You're going to want to keep that handy. Because if this wasn't approved by the city, you've just tampered with infrastructure under false pretenses. The 2 men exchanged a glance, then mumbled something about checking with dispatch and retreated to the truck. By the time they left, the entire street was buzzing with anger. Seniors who relied on home medical devices, parents with babies woken from naps. One neighbor's freezer had already started defrosting. Reagan made a call to the city's utility department. On speaker, the clerk confirmed they had never issued an order for disconnection and had no record of any safety concern. That was the final nail. We'd uncovered fraud, financial misconduct, and now, unauthorized tampering with public utilities. Within the hour, a detective from the county Special Investigations Unit pulled up in an unmarked SUV. He introduced himself as Detective Callahan and asked to speak with us inside. We gave him everything: printouts, photos, statements from the neighbors. Reagan handed over the leaked meeting minutes on a flash drive. As he reviewed the documents, his expression darkened. You're telling me this board's been using fake LLCs to funnel HOA dues into personal accounts, and now they're issuing illegal utility disconnections as punishment, Reagan nodded. The power cut was retaliation, we know it. They've been targeting anyone who pushes back. Detective Callahan flipped through the folder silently for another moment, then he stood. This is more than housing code violations, he said. This is organized theft and abuse of authority. We'll be opening a criminal investigation immediately. I'll need statements from as many residents as you can gather. That night, the community center was packed. Word had spread fast. By 6 o'clock, more than 50 families had arrived, some standing in the back when the folding chairs filled up. Detective Callahan and 2 deputies took statements at separate tables while Reagan coordinated the sign and sheet. Daniel brought receipts. Tanya brought photos of her damaged landscaping. Mr. Vargas came with a binder the size of a phone book detailing every fine he'd received in the last year. And across the room, standing near the door with arms crossed and a face like she'd bitten into a lemon, was Carol. She watched as neighbor after neighbor stepped forward, telling stories of harassment, fake citations, threats of foreclosure. When she finally approached the table, Detective Callahan didn't even look up. "You'll be contacted for questioning," he said. "Please leave room for others giving statements." "I'm the president of this HOA," she snapped. "I demand to know what authority gives you the right to," he raised his eyes then. Calm, flat. "Ma'am, you'll want to contact an attorney." Carol stormed out without another word. By the end of the week, subpoenas were issued. Hal was questioned at his office. Greg Lowell's law license was suspended pending investigation. Carol's bank records were frozen, and the HOA's entire board was placed on administrative leave by court order. In their place, a temporary oversight committee made up of 5 residents, including Reagan and Daniel, was appointed by the county to stabilize the neighborhood. At the first open meeting held under the new committee, Reagan stood at the front of the room, not in uniform, not as a commanding officer, but as a neighbor. She laid out the plan: transparent accounting, repeal of all fraudulent fines, a freeze on all enforcement actions until a full audit was complete, and open elections within 60 days to replace the board democratically. Someone in the second row raised a hand. "What about the flagpole?" Reagan gave a small nod. "It stays." The room applauded. Loud, sustained, real. After the meeting, a woman approached us, thin, early 70s, with silver hair and a tremble in her voice. "I've lived here since the community was built," she said. "I thought I'd have to sell just to get peace, but what you two did. You gave us our homes back." Reagan shook her hand gently. "No one should be afraid of the people meant to serve them." As we walked home under the stars, the flags on our pole fluttered calmly in the evening breeze. No one questioned them now, and Carol, she hadn't been seen in days, but the investigation wasn't over, not by a long shot. Detective Callahan had hinted there were deeper layers: shell companies tied to property management firms, connections to a state-level real estate developer, and possible collusion with a former board member who'd relocated to another county. Reagan was already digging. Because this wasn't just about a flagpole. It was about reminding the people who thought they could hide behind bureaucracy and fear that when a community stands together, especially one with a lieutenant colonel and a retired paralegal in its corner, they don't stand a chance. And this time, the fight was far from over. But it was ours. By the following week, Reagan was spending most mornings at the temporary HOA office, formerly a broom closet at the clubhouse, sorting through what could only be described as a bureaucratic crime scene. Every drawer was stuffed with half-shredded invoices, unsigned contracts, and receipts that didn't match any known service providers. City auditors had joined the effort. One of them, a woman named Leela with gray roots and a no-nonsense tone, had already flagged over 80 suspicious transactions. Every time she found another payment routed through shell accounts, she just muttered, "This is going to court," and moved on. I was doing my part too. With Daniel's help, we built a timeline of every major board decision over the past 2 years. The deeper we dug, the more it became clear. This wasn't mismanagement, it was deliberate, organized theft. The HOA had been used as a front to extract money from homeowners, then funnel it into personal projects, and they'd left a trail. That Thursday, a call came in from Detective Callahan. Reagan put him on speaker. "We just got confirmation from the State Financial Crimes Division," he said. "Two of the former board members are under active investigation for wire fraud and racketeering. We also found evidence that Carol personally authorized over $20,000 in duplicate payments to a landscaping company that doesn't exist. The account those payments ended up in, registered to her niece in Nevada." Reagan tilted her head. "Is that enough to arrest? It's enough for an indictment. The DA is already drafting charges." I leaned forward. "What about the rest of the board? They're being subpoenaed for testimony. If any of them flipped roles to avoid liability, we'll know." Reagan reached for a file. "There's something else. In the last batch of documents, I found a checklist dated 2 months ago. It included our address circled in red ink. Next to it, a note reading non-compliant initiate Phase 2 sale review." Callahan paused. "You're saying they were targeting your property for forced resale?" "Looks like it," Reagan said. "They wanted us out," he exhaled. "They overplayed their hand. We've got enough here to knock down the whole operation. But I'll need you both to testify when this goes to court." "Count on it," I said. The next day, the sheriff's department executed a warrant on Carol's home. Half the neighborhood watched from their porches as deputies carried out boxes of documents, hard drives, and a safe that had to be wheeled out on a dolly. Carol herself was escorted out in handcuffs, still wearing her HOA name badge like it might somehow protect her. She didn't say a word. Not to the officers, not to the neighbors, not to the reporter from Channel 7 who showed up just in time to catch the tail end of the arrest. By the following Monday, Hal Beringer and 2 other former board members had turned themselves in. Greg Lowell, the so-called legal consultant, was named as an unregistered lobbyist with ties to a real estate flipping firm in Denver. He was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice. But the real surprise came from the forensic accountant assigned to the case. "Your HOA had a shadow budget," she told us during a meeting at City Hall. "A completely separate set of books. They were collecting illegal fees and routing them into a fund marked Reserve Emergency Disbursements, but none of that money went toward community improvements." Reagan flipped through the files. "Where did it go?" "Partial payments on a lakefront property near Boulder. Owned by a trust Carol had controlling interest in." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "She was stealing from us to buy a vacation estate, not just her," the accountant said. "Looks like Hal and another board member were co-beneficiaries. This wasn't just petty corruption. It was a coordinated scheme." Reagan nodded once. "We'll testify to everything." In the weeks that followed, the case made local headlines. The community, once cautious and quiet, became energized. Neighbors held town halls on weekends. People who had never spoken more than a wave were now working side by side to rebuild what had been broken. Reagan helped draft a new set of bylaws, this time with actual legal oversight. No vague language, no loopholes. Every action, every expenditure would be subject to a public vote. Daniel offered to serve as treasurer on an interim basis until elections could be held, and me. I started a neighborhood newsletter, just a 1-page sheet at first, printed on our home laser printer and distributed door to door. I called it the Flag Post. It covered everything from meeting dates to stories of how residents had fought back, and one morning, a letter arrived from the district attorney's office. Inside was a court summary of the charges filed: wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, abuse of fiduciary duty, and 1 count of criminal mischief for the unauthorized utility disconnection. Carol was facing up to 20 years. At the next community meeting, Reagan stood before a packed room. This time, she wore jeans and a sweater, no clipboard, no printed statutes, just a calm presence and the steady respect of everyone around her. "This isn't about settling scores," she said. "It's about making sure no one else has to go through what we did. It's about remembering that this neighborhood doesn't belong to a board. It belongs to us." Applause rose like a wave, not polite, but real. Across the room, I saw Mr. Vargas shaking hands with Tanya. Kids were playing outside again. porch lights were on. People were reclaiming more than just their homes. After the meeting, Reagan and I walked home together under a sky that looked cleaner somehow. The flags on our pole moved slowly in the breeze, steady and unbothered. At the foot of our driveway, she stopped. "You know," she said, "when I first got back from deployment, I didn't think I'd need to fight another battle so soon." "You didn't," I said. "You led one." She looked up at the flag, then back at me. "Next time someone tries to run this place like a kingdom," she said, "they're going to find out pretty fast we don't do tyrants here." And just like that, the neighborhood wasn't afraid anymore. The fear was gone. The silence was gone. In its place was something stronger. A community that had looked corruption in the face stood its ground and won. The pole still stood, the flag still flew, and the people it represented, they were finally, undeniably free.